The Valorians had mapped every star system within 40,000 light-years. They had cured 17 forms of cellular decay. Their ships could fold space the way a child folds paper, carelessly, effortlessly, without thinking twice about what they were doing to the geometry of the universe. They had been watching Earth for 231 years before they made contact. And in all that time, with all those instruments, all that data, all those cold and perfect observations, not one of them had ever seen a human being do something completely, spectacularly, unreasonably stupid out of sheer stubbornness. They were not prepared for Marcus Webb. He was 34 years old. He had a torn rotator cuff, a 10-year-old mountain bike with a cracked rear derailleur, $17 in his bank account, and a delivery bag strapped to his back containing one order of pad thai and a side of spring rolls that needed to reach the corner of 5th and Callaway in 11 minutes, or the customer got their money back. The Valorian observation drone, cloaked, the size of a dinner plate, hovering at 400 meters, tracked him as he shot a red light on Merchant Street. Senior observer Caliph, 3, noted the breach of local traffic law in her report. She noted it again 40 seconds later when he did it a second time. By the third light, she stopped noting it and just watched, because there was something in the way he moved that didn't compute. Not the speed. Their models had already calculated his maximum possible velocity on a bicycle against a 12% gradient with a torn right shoulder and a slipping chain. He should have been slowing down. The math said slow down. The physics said slow down. Every reasonable model of a biological organism managing energy expenditure under duress said he would reach a rational threshold of effort, recognize the futility of the situation, and stop. He did not stop. He stood up off the seat. He drove both legs down like he was trying to push the street through the planet. The cracked derailleur screamed. The bag on his back shifted, and he shifted with it without thinking, without looking, the way water moves around a stone, not by deciding, just by being what it is. He made the corner of 5th and Callaway in 9 minutes and 40 seconds. Caliph, 3, sat very still inside her observation module. She pulled up the global database of documented human behaviors across 2 centuries of observation. She cross-referenced endurance metrics, pain tolerance indices, decision-making under stress, irrational goal fixation, and what human researchers themselves called, without irony, apparently spite. She filed a new report. It was 4 words long. We have miscalculated something. Asterisk that report. That small, quiet, 4-word report from a junior observer in a drone above a city that didn't know it was being watched was the first domino. It would take 2 more years before anyone understood what it meant. It would take a war before they understood why it mattered. But it started there, on a bike, with 11 minutes on the clock and a bag full of pad thai. The Valorian First Contact Protocol was a document 4,000 pages long. It had been written across 11 decades by some of the finest diplomatic minds in the known collaborative species who had negotiated peace between stellar empires, who had dissolved wars before the first shot was fired, who had translated the concept of surrender into 46 different languages without ever making the losing side feel small. They were extraordinary at what they did. They had thought of everything. They had not thought of Marcus Webb. When the Valorian diplomatic vessel Enduring Clarity descended through Earth's atmosphere on a Tuesday morning in October, it did so precisely as the protocol demanded. Slow, visible, non-threatening. The ship was shaped like a smooth river stone. Nothing aggressive in its geometry, nothing that a nervous species would read as a weapon. It landed in the broad, flat field outside Geneva that had been quietly prepared 3 weeks in advance by Valorian ground agents who had been living among the human population for long enough to know that a surprise landing in any city would cause 17 kinds of chaos that would take decades to undo. The field was cordoned off. There were cameras. There were 16 governments on the phone with each other simultaneously. There were 12 different translation algorithms running on 3 different continents, all of them ready. Ambassador Vetheron stepped out of the ship and onto the grass of a small planet that had been talking to itself about alien life for as long as it had been able to talk, and he said in clear and practiced English. We come with the intention of cooperation. The cameras went wild. The governments went wilder. The translation algorithms, for once, had nothing to do. The words were simple, direct, already in English. No ambiguity whatsoever. It was, by every conceivable measure, a perfect moment. 48 hours later, it was still a perfect moment. Handshakes had been exchanged. Preliminary agreements had been drafted. The Valorian delegation had been escorted to a secure facility outside the city where they sat across a table from a carefully assembled team of Earth's best: linguists, diplomats, physicists, biologists, and two generals who said almost nothing but wrote everything down. The humans asked questions. The Valorians answered them. The Valorians asked questions. The humans answered them. Nobody said anything wrong. Nobody made any sudden moves. The protocol was working exactly as it was designed to work, and Vethnaran, who had overseen 4 other first contacts in his career and found them all exhausting in different ways, allowed himself to think that this one might actually go smoothly. Then, the report from Caliph 3 reached his desk. He read it 3 times. Then, he called her in. She was young for a Valorian, which meant she looked about 40 by human standards, and was actually closer to 210. She had the careful posture of someone who expected to be wrong, and had already decided to hold her ground anyway, which Vethnaran recognized because he had been that person once, and he had a soft spot for it he never admitted to. "Explain," he said. She explained. The bike, the delivery, the math that said slow down, and the human who did not hear the math, the torn shoulder, the slipping chain, the 9 minutes and 40 seconds. Vethnaran listened without interrupting, which was unusual for him. "One incident," he said when she finished. "I cross-referenced," she said. "It's not one incident. It's a pattern across 2 centuries of observation that we consistently categorized as outlier behavior and declined to model. I believe we declined to model it because it didn't fit any of our existing frameworks for biological organism behavior under stress." "And what framework would you propose?" She was quiet for a moment. "I don't have one yet. That's the problem." He looked at her report again. "For words, we have miscalculated something." "What do you think we miscalculated?" "The variable," she said. "Every species we've contacted has a threshold, a rational ceiling of effort beyond which survival instinct kicks in and redirects energy toward preservation. Humans appear to have that threshold, but they also appear to have something else underneath it, something that kicks in when they've decided the thing matters. And that second layer doesn't respond to pain signals or energy depletion calculations. It responds to," she paused. "I'm still working on the correct terminology." "Try." "Meaning," she said, "not the philosophical concept. The functional one. When a human assigns sufficient meaning to an objective, the standard cost-benefit calculation stops being the primary driver of behavior." Vethnaran set the report down. "That's not unique. We've seen that in 3 other species. In controlled experiments," she said. "In laboratory analogs. In documented extreme scenarios. Survival of offspring. Defense of territory. Not in," she gestured vaguely, "recreational physical activity. Employment obligations. The delivery of prepared food." He stared at her. "He cared about being on time," she said. "That was the whole thing. He decided it mattered. And once he decided, the rest of his body's objections became irrelevant to the decision." The room was quiet. "File a full behavioral analysis," Vethnaran said. "And, Caliph, don't mention this to the protocol team yet. I want to understand it better before it influences the negotiation posture." She nodded and left. He sat alone with the 4 words for a long time. 3 weeks into formal contact, the Valorians made their first offer. It was by any standard extraordinary. Energy technology. Specifically a contained fusion application that would, if implemented correctly, make every existing form of human power generation obsolete within a generation. Clean. Scalable. Designed to be reverse-engineered by a species at Earth's level of technological development, which was a courtesy the Valorians had never extended to any species they contacted, and which the protocol team had debated for 6 years before approving. The offer was genuine. The Valorians wanted nothing in exchange except membership in the collaborative, a political and economic union of 41 species spanning a significant portion of the galaxy. The membership terms were fair. Humans had read them, counterproposed on 7 minor points. The Valorians had accepted 5 of the 7, and the remaining 2 were still being argued over by lawyers who were having the time of their lives. It should have been straightforward. The problem was Dr. Yara Osei. She was Earth's lead physicist on the contact team, 51 years old, with short natural hair going silver at the temples, and the particular kind of quiet authority that comes from being the smartest person in any room she enters and being too tired to perform about it anymore. She had reviewed the fusion technology documentation for 2 weeks before she said anything in the joint sessions. When she spoke, she said, "This is elegant. I want to understand why you designed it this way." The Valorian technical liaison, a tall being called Sorith 7, explained. His explanation was thorough, precise, and slightly condescending in the way that all explanations are slightly condescending when the explainer believes the gap in understanding is larger than it is. Yara listened. Then she asked a follow-up question. Sorith 7 answered it. She asked another. He answered that one too, but with a small pause before he did. The kind of pause that means the question was better than expected. For 2 hours, she asked questions, and somewhere in the middle of the second hour, the other humans in the room noticed that Sorith 7 had stopped explaining and started actually thinking before he answered, which was different, which was interesting. At the end of the session, as people were gathering their things, he said to her in a tone that was almost but not quite casual, "You identified a suboptimal load distribution in the secondary coil architecture." "It's not suboptimal," she said, snapping her laptop shut. "It's just not the most obvious solution. Your engineers solved for the most direct path. I was wondering why they didn't consider the indirect one. Because it would be less efficient. In a fixed location installation, yes." She looked at him. "But you designed this to be scalable. Variable installation. If someone puts this in a high-altitude context or a low-gravity environment, your direct path solution bleeds about 12% of output. The indirect routing holds." Sorith 7 was silent. "I could be wrong," she said pleasantly. "I've only had 2 weeks with the documentation." She was not wrong. It took the Valorian technical team 4 days to confirm it, during which time Sorith 7 filed his own report that went up the same chain as Caliph 3's because there was now a chain, and it was labeled internally as the Human Anomaly Documentation Series, which nobody outside of Ethneron's direct team knew existed yet. His report was longer than hers, but the conclusion was the same. "We have miscalculated something." Asterisk Marcus Webb did not know any of this. He was still riding his bike. The rotator cuff had gotten worse. He'd seen a doctor about it now, which he'd put off for 8 months because the copay was $60, and $60 was a full afternoon of deliveries, and the doctor had told him he needed to stop riding for 6 weeks minimum. He had nodded and said he understood, and then ridden home from the clinic and picked up 4 more delivery orders because it was a Friday night, and Friday nights were good, and the rent was due in 10 days. The drone was still watching him. Caliph 3 had taken on the web documentation almost as a personal project at this point, which was technically outside her operational remit, but which nobody had told her to stop because Vethneron had read her first 3 follow-up reports and thought they were the most interesting things to cross his desk since the contact mission began. She watched Webb take a corner too fast on a wet street and correct for the slide without thinking about it. Body adjusting before the conscious mind caught up, weight shifting in the half-second window between almost falling and not falling, and she noted it with the kind of precision that was starting to feel, even to her, like something more than scientific documentation. He was not the most impressive human she'd observed. That was the thing. That was, in fact, the most important thing. He wasn't extraordinary by human standards. He didn't have special training. He didn't have resources or advantages or any particular status. He was thoroughly, completely average, a fact she had verified across 17 different human metric categories, and he just kept doing this thing where he decided something mattered, and then his body agreed with the decision regardless of what his body thought about it. She filed a note in the behavioral series. Asterisk subject appears to experience willpower not as a mental state, but as a physical one. The decision recruits the body rather than overriding it. This may be the key distinction. Asterisk then, she added because she was young and still occasionally wrote things she'd later edit out. I find myself wanting to know what it feels like from the inside. She deleted that line. Then she put it back. Then she filed a report and didn't think about it again for 3 days, at which point the war started. Not a real war. Not yet. It started as a diplomatic incident, which is what wars are called when people are still hoping they can be something else. The Kroth, a species the Valorians had a complicated relationship with, which was a diplomatic way of saying a relationship characterized by deep mutual distrust, one broken treaty, and a border dispute that had been simmering for 40 years, had been watching the Earth contact situation with great interest. The Kroth were not part of the collaborative. They wanted to be. The Valorians had blocked their application twice on the grounds that their governance structure was fundamentally incompatible with collaborative membership requirements, which was a diplomatic way of saying the Valorians didn't trust them and had the votes to enforce it. When the Valorians extended the fusion technology offered to Earth, a species that hadn't even broken orbit under their own power, yet a species that was by conventional collaborative metrics nowhere near ready for full membership, it sent a message. Several messages, depending on how you read it. The Kroth read it as, asterisk Earth gets in, we get blocked. This is political. This was never about the membership criteria. Asterisk, they weren't entirely wrong. Their response was to send their own ship to Earth. Not a diplomatic vessel, technically. It was classified as an observation and preliminary contact mission, which was the kind of language that means something is happening and nobody is admitting what it is yet. They did not land. They took a position in low orbit. They sent a communication to the Valorian delegation that was phrased politely and meant, we know what you're doing and we're here now, so you know that we know. The Valorian protocol team convened at midnight Geneva time and argued for 4 hours. Vethnaron let them argue. He had learned, over 200 years of diplomacy, that sometimes the most useful thing you can do in a room full of very smart people is let them find the edge of their own cleverness. They would argue. They would propose solutions. The solutions would be good, thorough, carefully structured, designed to de-escalate without conceding ground. And all of them would miss the thing that Caliph III had been documenting for 3 weeks. He waited until they'd exhausted themselves. Then he said, I want to bring a human into the room. The silence was the particular kind that means that is unexpected, and we are processing it. We're negotiating on behalf of Earth, someone said. We are negotiating in the presence of Earth, he said, which is different. We've been very careful to keep the human team informed without involving them. I think that was an error. The protocol doesn't allow for the protocol, Vethnaron said, was written before Caliph III's reports. Another silence. Which human? Someone asked. He thought about it. He had read 20 pages of documentation on Dr. Yaro Osei. He had also read everything Caliph III had written about Marcus Webb. They were very different documents. They pointed at the same thing from opposite directions. Both, he said, and someone find out if Webb's shoulder is well enough to ride. Nobody had told Marcus Webb anything about the Kroth. He learned about the ship in orbit the same way most people did, through a news alert on his phone while he was waiting for an order to be bagged at a Thai place on Clement Street. The notification said second alien vessel takes position in Earth orbit. Officials say no immediate threat. He read it twice, pocketed his phone, picked up the bag when it came out, and spent the ride to the delivery address thinking about the fact that there were now 2 alien ships overhead, and one of them apparently hadn't been invited. He was not a man who panicked. This was not bravery, it was bandwidth. When you're managing rent, a bad shoulder, a bike that needs a new chain, and a delivery rating that can't drop below 4.7 or the app pulls your account, there's simply not enough cognitive real estate available for existential dread. He delivered the food. He got a good tip. He picked up the next order. He did not know that a very small drone had been following him for 3 weeks. He did not know that footage of him writing had been presented in a closed-session diplomatic briefing to a senior Valorian ambassador who had highlighted the footage twice and used to phrase the relevant variable in a way that confused everyone in the room except Kayla 3, who understood exactly what he meant and felt obscurely like she'd won something. He did not know any of this. He found out on a Wednesday. A woman came to his apartment building door. She was with 2 other people. She was carrying a badge that had enough acronyms on it to suggest she represented more than one government at once, which turned out to be accurate. She asked him if he was Marcus Webb. He said yes. She said there was a situation and she would explain in the car. The car was nicer than any car he'd ever been in. "Are you arresting me?" he said. "No," she said. "Am I in trouble?" "Not yet," she said. He looked out the window at the city going by. His shoulder throbbed. He had a delivery bag in the back seat because he'd been between orders when she knocked, and he just brought it with him out of habit. "What did I do?" he asked. "You rode your bike," she said, and she said in the tone of someone delivering a sentence that she was aware sounded insane and had decided to just commit to it anyway. The facility outside Geneva was different in October than it had been when the Valorians first landed. The early weeks had had the feeling of a controlled experiment. Everything contained, watched, precise. Now it had the feeling of something that had outgrown its container. There were more people, more rooms, a hum of activity that was less organized than it looked, the way all genuinely high-stakes situations eventually become less organized than they look once you're inside them. Dr. Yara Osei was already there when Marcus arrived. She was in a small conference room off the main corridor, reading something on a tablet with the focused stillness of a person who only has one mode of attention. She looked up when he came in. She looked at him with the frankly appraising look of someone whose job is to assess things accurately and who extends that habit to people without quite meaning to. "You're the bike rider," she said. "Everyone keeps saying it like that," he said, "because apparently it means something." She set the tablet down. "They showed me the footage and the analysis. What does it feel like when you're doing it? Past the point where it makes sense to keep going?" He sat down across from her. He thought about the question with the seriousness it was being asked, which he appreciated. "It doesn't feel like anything different," he said. "You just stop arguing with yourself. What were you arguing about before? Whether it was worth it?" He stretched his shoulders slightly, automatically, the way people do with something that hurts regularly enough to become background noise. And then at some point you just decide it is, and then your body stops bringing it up. Yara was quiet for a moment. She picked up her pen and didn't write anything, just held it. "That's what they can't model," she said. "The part where the decision changes the body's behavior instead of the other way around. They're trying to model me? They've been watching you for 3 weeks." He looked at the ceiling. "Oh," he said. Then, because it seemed like the next thing to say, "Why?" "Because they're trying to figure out if we're worth something they didn't expect us to be worth." The door opened before he could respond to that, and Vethneron walked in with 2 aides and Kayla 3, who Marcus would later describe as the one who looked like she was trying very hard not to look like she was studying me, which was accurate. The briefing took 2 hours. Vethneron explained the Kroth situation in the direct, unembellished way of someone who has learned that complicated truth delivered plainly is better received than simple truth delivered with diplomatic cushioning. The Kroth wanted leverage. The collaborative membership process had political layers that the member species preferred not to discuss openly, but which functionally meant that Earth's admission was not only about Earth. It was about what Earth's admission meant for the Kroth's exclusion, and for the balance of influence within the collaborative, and for 4 ongoing territorial disputes that were technically unrelated but practically entangled with everything. "You brought us here because you want something specific," Yara said when he finished. Not accusatory, just placing the fact on the table. "Yes." "What?" "Insight," he said. "We have spent 2 centuries observing your species, and I have a growing concern that we have drawn conclusions from those observations that are systematically incorrect. Not in matters of physics or biology. In matters of," he paused, and the pause was honest, "motivation, and what follows from it." Marcus had been quiet for most of the briefing. He was not a man who spoke in rooms like this. He had no particular training for rooms like this, had spent most of his adult life in rooms that were the opposite of this in every way, smaller and more urgent and with worse chairs. But he had a quality that Caliph 3 had documented and that Vethnaron had read about, and that was in person exactly what the documentation suggested. He listened as if listening was itself a task he'd decided to do properly. What kind of insight? Marcus said. The Kroth vessel is not armed, Vethnaron said. But it is a provocation. Standard diplomatic response is to match their presence, send a collaborative vessel, signal that we are prepared to hold the position. That's what my team recommends. And the problem with that? Yara said, the Kroth response to a matched presence will be escalation. Another vessel, a communication to Kroth-allied, non-member species. The situation will grow. We have modeled this across 960 possible diplomatic trajectories, and in 842 of them, the eventual outcome is a confrontation that delays Earth's formal admission by a minimum of 6 years. He looked at both of them. We want to know if there's a trajectory we haven't modeled. The room was quiet. You're asking two random humans if they can outthink your 1,000-year-old diplomatic computer, Marcus said. I'm asking two humans who have demonstrated a capacity for approaching problems from angles that our models don't generate, Vethnaron said, which is a more specific thing. Another quiet. The air conditioning in the room was slightly too cold. Marcus noticed this and noticed that he was the only one who seemed to notice it, which was interesting. Tell me about the Kroth, Yara said, not the political summary. What do they actually want? Underneath the leverage. Caliph 3 answered before Vethnaron could. Recognition, she said. Their application to the collaborative has been blocked twice. Their governance structure is the stated reason. The unstated reason is that several member species have territorial disputes with Kroth systems and don't want their influence in the collaborative's voting structure. So they're being kept out for political reasons dressed up as procedural ones. Marcus said, yes, and everybody knows it. Everyone in this conversation knows it. Marcus nodded slowly. So the thing that would actually defuse this isn't a show of force. No, it's someone acknowledging that they're being treated unfairly. The pause that followed this was a specific kind. The pause of a room full of people who have been circling an obvious thing for a long time and had just watched someone walk directly up to it and point at it. We cannot acknowledge it, Vethnaron said. Officially, the collaborative position is that the membership criteria are, I wasn't suggesting you acknowledge it officially, Marcus said. I was asking whether someone could. The meeting with the Kroth representative happened 4 days later. It was not on any official calendar. It was not attended by any Valorian diplomat, any government representative, any member of the formal contact team. The protocol had nothing to say about it because the protocol had not anticipated it, and what the protocol doesn't cover exists in a space of plausible deniability that experienced diplomats learn to use like a tool. The Kroth representative was a being named Vorithsal, who had the bearing of someone who had spent many years being correct about things and having people pretend they weren't. He sat across from Marcus and Yara in a neutral meeting room that had been arranged through 3 layers of carefully disavowed intermediaries, and he looked at them with the expression of a person who had shown up primarily out of curiosity and intended to leave the moment the curiosity was satisfied. Yara let Marcus open. He was not a diplomat. He had no particular gift for formal language or structured argument. What he had, what Caliph 3 had been documenting for weeks without fully understanding what she was documenting, was the quality of someone who has made a decision about what matters and is therefore incapable of performing anything other than exactly what he means. They sent us, Marcus said, because we're new. We don't have 40 years of history with you. We don't have positions to protect. And they thought maybe that was worth something. Vorithsal said nothing. I read the summary of your membership applications, Marcus said. Both of them. And the stated reasons for the refusals. He paused. Is there anything you actually want from Earth specifically? Or is Earth just the lever that was available? Another silence. Longer. Vorithsal's attention, which had been professionally neutral since they'd walked in, shifted slightly. The way attention shifts when a question is better than expected. Earth is, Vorith Sal said carefully, a new variable. New variables change existing equations. That's what we are to you. A variable. What are we to you? Marcus looked at him steadily. Honestly, we just found out you exist 4 days ago. So I don't have a position on you yet. Which means I'm probably the only person in this building who doesn't. Something in Vorith Sal's posture changed. Not dramatically. A small thing. The particular kind of relaxation that happens when a person stops waiting for the attack. Yara spoke for the first time. Is there something specific the Kroth need from the collaborative? Something the membership would give you that you can't get another way? Vorith Sal looked at her. He was quiet for long enough that it became clear he was deciding something. There is a data-sharing treaty between 6 collaborative members that covers astrophysical survey data from a region of space that includes 2 systems with Kroth settlements. The Kroth are not party to the treaty. We cannot access the data. It affects our ability to, he stopped. Started again. There are weather pattern analogs in gas giant atmospheres that we use for. It's not a military application. It's agricultural. The data affects food system planning for 11 million people. Yara wrote something down. Didn't say anything yet. That's not in any of the public-facing documentation about your membership application, Marcus said. It's not the kind of thing that appears in public-facing documentation. Why not? Vorith Sal looked at him for a moment. Because making the need visible is a vulnerability. Marcus nodded. Yeah, he said. I get that. He said it so simply, so without inflation, that something in the room became different after it. Not resolved. Nothing was resolved. Nothing could be resolved in one conversation. Nothing in diplomacy ever resolves in one conversation. But different. The Kroth representative was sitting with 2 people who had no power and no history and no angles, and one of them had just said, I get that about a vulnerability in a way that made it clear he actually did, and that he was not going to do anything with it except hold it carefully. Yara looked up from her notes. If the data access issue were resolved separately from the membership question through a different mechanism, would the presence in orbit still be necessary? Vorith Sal looked at her for a long time. That, he said slowly, would depend on how the mechanism was structured. Yara nodded. She clicked her pen. Okay, she said. Let's talk about structure. Marcus went home 4 days after that. He went home because there was nothing else for him to do. The thing he'd done, the specific thing, the one conversation, the 1 hour of saying what he meant without architecture around it, had either worked or it hadn't, and waiting in a conference room wasn't going to change which one. He went home and checked the app and picked up 3 orders and rode for 6 hours in the pale fall light. And his shoulder was bad, but manageable, and the chain on the bike was still slipping, but he knew how to compensate for it. And the city around him was exactly what it had always been. Full of people in a hurry, full of lights at intersections that meant stop and lights that meant go, and 1,000 in-between moments where you had to make a fast call with incomplete information. He made it. He always made it. Caliph, 3 watch from 400 meters up. She was not taking official notes anymore. She was aware of this. She filed it away as something to think about later, which is what people do with things they're not ready to think about yet. The orbital situation resolved 17 days after the conversation with Vorith Sal. The mechanism Yara had proposed, a provisional data-sharing agreement outside the formal collaborative structure, technically between the 6 treaty nations and the Kroth directly, with Earth as a neutral facilitating signatory, was not elegant. It was the diplomatic equivalent of a cracked rear derailleur. Functional, imperfect, nobody's ideal solution, and also the thing that actually worked. The Kroth vessel departed orbit on a Tuesday. Vethneron filed a report to the Collaborative Council. It was detailed, thorough, and credited the resolution to a novel facilitation approach developed in consultation with the Earth Contact Team. The report did not mention the specific humans involved, which was standard protocol. It mentioned the approach, which was not standard at all. He also wrote a separate, private communication to Caliph 3. It said, Asterisk, you were right. Update the models. Asterisk, she read it 3 times. Then, she went back to her documentation of Marcus Webb, and added a single line at the bottom of the behavioral series. The mechanism by which meaning converts to action may be more significant to first contact outcomes than any technological or intellectual capability differential. Recommend. Reclassify from outlier documentation to primary research priority. Asterisk, she filed it. Then, she pulled up the live drone feed, which was technically against protocol for personal use during off-shift hours, and watched him ride down a hill in the evening light with the bag on his back, and the broken derailleur, and the shoulder that didn't quite work right, and she thought about what he'd said in the conference room. You just stop arguing with yourself. Asked her she did not know, watching him, that the part of her that had written, "I find myself wanting to know what it feels like from the inside," and then deleted it and then put it back, that part was not going to get quieter. She did not know that the next phase of the situation would involve her directly, and Marcus specifically, and a problem that had no diplomatic solution and no clean model and no protocol-approved response. She did not know any of that yet. She just watched him ride. The city spread out around him, lit and ordinary, full of people who had no idea that anything had changed. Maybe nothing had. Maybe everything had. That was the thing about variables. You didn't know what they'd changed until you could see the new shape of the equation they were part of. He made a left on Merchant Street. He ran the red light. She noted it out of habit. Then she smiled, which was not a thing she did in professional contexts, and closed a feed and went to write the most important report of her career. The Collaborative Council did not like Caliph 3's report. This was not a surprise to anyone who had read it. It was the kind of document that people don't like not because it's wrong. Everyone who read it came away with the uneasy feeling that it was more right than they wanted, but because its implications were uncomfortable in the specific way that implications are uncomfortable when they require you to revise something you thought was settled. The Council had built 400 years of first contact methodology on a framework that treated technological and intellectual capacity as the primary indicators of species readiness for collaborative membership. The framework was rigorous. It had worked 22 times. It had peer-reviewed literature behind it from 6 different species, academic traditions. It was the kind of framework that gets treated like a fact. Caliph 3's report said, the framework has a hole in it. The hole is human-shaped. The hole has always been there. She was called to present before the Council 3 weeks after the Crow situation resolved. Not a disciplinary presentation, which was how Vethnaran had negotiated it, but an academic one. He had framed it as a research briefing, which was technically accurate, and also a tactic, and he had learned the tactic from a human, which he did not include in his framing. She stood before 11 species representatives in a chamber that made every conference room on Earth look like a closet, and she presented her documentation, her analysis, and her conclusion. The variable that human behavioral data consistently demonstrated was not intelligence. It was not physical capability. It was not any form of technological sophistication. It was the capacity to decide that something mattered and then have the body agree so completely that the system's own self-preservation calculations became secondary inputs rather than primary ones. She called it, in the final draft of her presentation, motivated continuance. The Council called it several other things, most of them skeptical. Every species demonstrates persistence under motivation, the Ondrith representative said. The Ondrith were one of the founding collaborative members, 700 years in, and they had the particular institutional confidence of a species that has been right often enough to sometimes forget about the times they weren't. This is not a new variable. This is basic behavioral biology dressed in specific language. It's not persistence, Caliph 3 said. It's persistence past the point that the organism's own systems recommend. That's the distinction. Every species we've documented has a threshold where survival optimization kicks in and overrides goal pursuit. Humans have that threshold. They also have something on the other side of it, documented in a sample of how many subjects? Broadly, 231 years of observational data on a planet of 8 billion individuals. Specifically, I began focused documentation on a single subject 6 weeks ago. She pulled up the footage. Marcus, the rain-wet street, the cracked derailleur, The hill. The clock. This individual is not exceptional by human standards. I want to be very precise about that. He is average in every metric I have measured. His behavior under conditions of goal commitment is not exceptional for his species. It is normal. The chamber was quiet. Average, the Andrith representative said. Thoroughly. Another quiet. The kind that is wait. What is the practical implication you're proposing? The federal representative asked. The federal were newer to the collaborative, 140 years, and they had the memory of being new, which made them better listeners than most. I'm proposing that when Earth encounters a problem the collaborative's technology cannot solve, and there will be such problems, there always are, the variable we should expect to matter is not the variable we've been measuring. She looked at the council. I'm proposing that we stop treating human irrationality as a bug in their behavioral profile and start treating it as a feature we don't have a model for yet. The problem arrived 4 months later, and it was not a war. It was quieter than a war, which made it harder. There was a relay station, a collaborative communications node, positioned at the edge of a mapped region, important not for what it currently handled, but for what it would be needed to handle in 18 months when a new survey cluster came online. The station had been damaged by a debris field. Not a weapon, not sabotage, just the universe being indifferent to the things people build inside it. The damage was to the station's position-keeping system. The station was drifting, slowly by deep space standards, fast enough by deadline standards to place it in a location where it would be useless by the time the new cluster needed it. The repair window was 11 days. The repair ship was 22 days out. The collaborative's engineering teams had been working on the problem for 72 hours before Vetheron heard about it, at which point he read the summary brief, and then set it down and picked up his communication terminal and called Caliph 3. Tell me about the station problem, she said before he said anything. You already know. It went through the same briefing channels I'm on. What do you want? The human contact mission is still ongoing. Yara Osei is still here. Tell me if any of this reads like a problem she'd find interesting. Caliph 3 was quiet for a moment. He could hear her reading. The position-keeping system, she said. The damage is to the thruster array. The backup array is functional, but underpowered for the required correction. They've been trying to calculate a solution that makes the backup sufficient. Correct. They need either a different power source or a different approach to the correction maneuver. The engineering teams have tried 412 calculated solutions. All of them require either the main array or the repair ship. What about a sequential correction? Small burns over a longer period rather than one correct burn. Vetheron smiled slightly. Not because this was the answer. He didn't know if it was the answer, but because she'd gotten there in 40 seconds. That's solution number 211. The problem is fuel quantity. The backup array doesn't carry enough for the number of sequential burns the math requires. How far short? 12%. The quiet this time was the particular kind that means that someone is thinking and would prefer not to be interrupted. Give me Yara Osei, Caliph 3 said. And she stopped. And get Marcus Webb too. He's a bicycle courier. I know what he is. Marcus flew to Geneva for the second time. He'd told the app he needed 3 days, which cost him 72 hours of income that he'd been thinking about since the moment he said yes. And he was thinking about it on the plane, running numbers, when the woman who'd come to his apartment the first time leaned across the aisle and said, "We're covering your lost earnings." He looked at her. She said, "We figured you'd be doing the math. We already worked it out." He looked out the window at the clouds below. "How'd you figure out what I make?" he said. "Honestly, your delivery rating and your market's average earnings per hour," she said. "We extrapolated." He thought about that. "I have a 4.82 rating." "We know." He didn't say anything else. He was thinking about the 11 days, which he knew about because they'd brief him on the plane, and about 11 minutes, which was the thing this had apparently started with, and about how those two numbers were different in every possible way except the quality of attention they required. The engineering room had the particular atmosphere of people who have been working on a problem for a long time without solving it. This is a specific atmosphere, distinct from panic, distinct from boredom, a kind of compressed, grinding focus that has lost its early energy and hasn't yet found its second wind. There were 17 engineers in the room when Marcus and Yara arrived. Several of them looked at Marcus the way people look at something they don't understand the purpose of yet. Yara went straight to the technical diagrams. Marcus went to the coffee station because he'd had 4 hours of sleep on the plane and listened. The Valorian lead engineer, a meticulous being named Aroth, 12, walked through the problem. The math was on the wall, literally projected across most of one surface of the room in a format that even Marcus, who had not taken a math class since high school, could understand was a lot of numbers that were not quite adding up. The fuel deficit, the 12%, the 412 solutions that each failed at the same point. Yara asked the questions she always asked, specific, layered, each one narrower than the last, like she was drilling towards something. Aroth, 12, answered them. 2 of the other engineers started answering them also, which was a sign that the conversation was getting somewhere. Marcus drank his coffee. He walked slowly along the length of the wall, reading the numbers with the expression of someone who doesn't read the language but is trying anyway. "What are the burns for?" he said. Everyone looked at him. "The sequential burns," he said. "Each one, what is it doing?" "Position correction, right? Moving the station, correcting the drift vector." "Yes," Aroth, 12, said, with the patience of someone explaining something to a person they're not sure will follow. "And the burns have to be in sequence because each one changes the vector for the next one." "Correct. And the problem is there's not enough fuel for all of them." "Correct. What if you didn't do all of them?" Marcus said. The room was quiet. "We need all of them," Aroth, 12, said. "Incomplete correction leaves the station out of position." "Right, but..." Marcus looked at the wall. He had the expression Caliph 3 had come to recognize. Not confusion, the opposite of confusion. The expression of someone who has found a thread and is pulling it without being entirely sure yet what it's attached to. You're planning all the burns in advance. You're calculating the full sequence before you start, and the total fuel use is what fails. Yes. What if you only calculated the first one? Did the first burn? Then measured where you actually are versus where you expected to be, and calculated the second burn from there? Aroth, 12, stared at him. Because if each burn is a little more efficient than predicted, Marcus stopped. Is that possible? Burns being slightly more efficient in practice than in calculation. The room erupted. Not the eruption of people who have been proven wrong. The eruption of 17 engineers who have been staring at a wall for 72 hours and had just seen a door in it. It was loud and fast, and half of it was in languages Marcus couldn't follow, and he stepped back from it instinctively, and Yara appeared at his elbow and said quietly, "You found it." "I don't know what I found," he said. "Yes, you do." He thought about it. "The efficiency margin," he said. "If the actual burns are even slightly cleaner than the model predicts, and you're recalculating after each one instead of up front, you're not committing the fuel in advance. You're only spending what each burn actually costs. And a 12% deficit distributed across 14 sequential burns, each burn recalculated fresh, might not be 12% anymore," he said. "By the end." "Right," Yara said. "By the end." He looked at the room of engineers who were now working at a pace that was completely different from 3 minutes ago. "I could have been totally wrong about this," he said. "You could have been," she said. "You weren't. But, more importantly, you said it anyway." He thought about that. "That's not special," he said. "That's just you try things. What's the point of not trying?" She looked at him for a moment with the appraising, data-collecting attention he'd gotten used to from her. "For a lot of species," she said, "the point of not trying is not being wrong. Being wrong in front of a room of experts is expensive. Reputation, authority, standing. The calculus says don't say the thing unless you're sure. What if you're never sure? Then you don't say anything." He looked at the engineers. They were building something on the wall now, a new model, different columns, numbers moving. One of them laughed, which was apparently not a common sound in this room, because 2 other engineers looked up at the sound, as if verifying it had happened. "That seems like a bad system," Marcus said. "Yes," Yara said. "It does." The station was repositioned in 9 days. The sequential recalculation approach worked. The actual fuel expenditure per burn was between 0.4 and 1.1% more efficient than the model predicted. Small numbers, individually meaningless, distributed across 14 burns with full recalculation at each step. By the 12th burn, they had enough surplus to extend the sequence if needed. It didn't need to. The station reached its target position on day 9. The repair ship arrived on day 22 to find a functioning, correctly positioned relay station waiting for it. The after-action report filed by the engineering team described the solution as an application of adaptive iterative correction, a known methodology in certain specific collaborative engineering contexts, but not one that had been applied to position-keeping corrections, because the standard approach was full pre-calculation and the standard approach had always worked before. The report was technically accurate. It did not mention Marcus Webb. Caliph 3's parallel report did. She was filing them regularly now, the behavioral series, now also including a new subsection she had labeled applied outcomes. It was longer than the original documentation. It was also better writing, which she was aware of and did not examine too closely. She sent the full series to Vethnaron with a cover note that said, "Asterisk, I want to revise my original framing. I said the variable was the capacity to continue past the threshold of optimal effort. I think I was slightly wrong. The more precise statement is, the variable is the capacity to act on incomplete information without requiring certainty first. The continuance is a symptom of that. The root is the willingness to try something without knowing if it will work." Asterisk, he responded. "That's a harder thing to model." She responded, asterisk, yes, but a more accurate one. Asterisk, Marcus's last night in Geneva, Caliph 3 asked to meet with him. Not officially. She came to the facility's common area, a room with large windows and a view of the Alps, which was probably beautiful and which Marcus had spent very little time looking at because it was also the room with the good coffee. And she sat across from him at a table that was empty except for 2 cups and whatever she'd been working on, which she closed when he sat down. He looked at her. He'd spent enough time around Valorians now to have a rough read on them. Not fluency, not anywhere near it, but the beginning of a sense for where the expression lived in their faces. She looked like someone who had a specific thing to say and was figuring out how. "The series you've been filing," he said. "About me." She nodded. "Can I ask what the conclusion is?" "Provisional conclusion," she said. "Still working on it." "Provisional." She turned her closed tablet over once in her hands. "When you were in the engineering room, you said the thing without being sure it was right." "Yeah." "Why?" He thought about it the same way he'd thought about the question Yara asked him, with actual attention, not the polite surface of attention that people give questions they've already decided are simple. "Because not saying it felt worse," he said. "I'd thought of it. If I kept it to myself, and it turned out to be right, that'd be..." He made a gesture that was somewhere between a shrug and a grimace. "That'd be the worst. That'd be the thing I couldn't take back. More than being wrong in public. Being wrong in public just means you're wrong. Being quiet when you knew something, that's different. That follows you." Caliph 3 looked at him for a long moment. Outside, the Alps were dark against a darker sky. "We have a concept," she said slowly, in Valorian psychology. "A state called completion of obligation. When a member of our society has done everything their function requires and done it correctly, they are in completion. It's considered the highest stable state. It's what the whole system is optimized for." "That sounds exhausting," Marcus said. She looked at him. "Why?" "Because you'd spend all your time figuring out what your obligation is, what the correct thing is, before you could do anything." She was quiet. "My whole job," he said, "is that there's no time for that. Someone ordered food. They're waiting. Whatever else is going on, the shoulder, the chain, the rain, whatever, those are not the job. The job is getting there. So you go, and if you get it wrong, wrong street, wrong building, then you're late and you've already gone and you figure it out from there." He drank his coffee. "I've delivered to wrong addresses. It happens. You call the customer, you find them, you fix it. The fix is worse than getting it right the first time, but it's not as bad as not going." Caliph 3 nodded slowly. She picked up her tablet. She opened it. She wrote something that he couldn't read from his angle, which might have been intentional. "Your provisional conclusion," he said. "What is it?" She considered whether to tell him. He watched her consider it, which she allowed because he was the subject of the research, and she decided, somewhere in the past 6 weeks of documentation, that the subject deserved more transparency than the methodology called for. "The most significant thing a species can have," she said, "in the moments when the calculation doesn't give you an answer, is the ability to act anyway. To go, without certainty, with incomplete information, with a broken chain and a bad shoulder and 11 minutes on the clock." She looked at him. "The collaborative has 41 member species and several hundred years of combined history. We have technology that would look like magic from where you're standing. We have models for almost everything." She paused. "We don't have that." The room was quiet. "It's not that complicated," Marcus said. "No," she said. "It's really not. That's the point." He flew home on a Thursday. The delivery app was open before the plane landed. He picked up an order from a ramen place on Judah, one of the good ones, the kind with the house-made noodles, where if you timed it right, you could still smell the broth through the bag. And he rode out into the evening, and the city was the city, the same as it had always been, lit and enormous and moving around him in all directions at once. His shoulder was bad, but he knew how to hold it. The chain still slipped on the 7th gear, which meant he kept it on the 6th and stood up on the hills. He had 37 minutes. He would make it in 22. He ran the light on Merchant Street. For 100 meters up, a small cloaked drone held position against a high, pale wind, and Caliph 3 watched him go, and the last line of her final report was already written in her head. Had been written for days, she just hadn't filed it yet, because she was still deciding if it said what she meant. It said, * the human capacity to act under uncertainty without requiring the certainty first is not a behavioral anomaly. It is not irrationality. It is not even courage in the way we have previously defined the term. It is a kind of faith, not religious, not philosophical, but functional. A working assumption that going is better than not going, that wrong and correcting is better than silent and certain, that the 11 minutes matter more than the shoulder. This capacity does not make them stronger than us. It does not make them smarter. It makes them useful in exactly the moments we are least useful to ourselves. And those moments, in my estimation, are the ones that determine everything else. She filed it. Below her, Marcus reached the delivery address with 9 minutes to spare. He waited for the customer to come down. He handed off the bag. The customer tipped him $3 in the app, which was good, and gave him a 4-star rating, which was not. And he stood on the sidewalk for a moment, looking at the notification with the expression of someone who has decided, again, that this is fine, that it continues to be fine, that the next order is already waiting. He accepted it. He rode. The city held him and let him through and held him again. The drone followed until it didn't need to anymore. The report filed, the data gathered, the conclusion reached, all of it already on its way to 11 council members in a chamber that dwarfed anything on Earth, all of it beginning to do the slow, tectonic work that reports do when they're right, and the people reading them know it and aren't quite ready yet to say so out loud. The equation had changed. It had changed because of a cracked derailleur and a bad shoulder and a man who had decided every single day for years that going was better than not going. He didn't know that. He was already on the next street, already checking the time, already leaning into the hill. That was the whole story, really. That was all of it.